We all know the ACC just doesn't get enough media coverage. What are the storylines that they should be talking more about that they're just not?
You are Locked On ACC, your daily podcast on the Atlantic Coast Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday. Shout out to the everydayers, and thank you so much for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel because new customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We'll talk about which of the ACC contending teams would be best equipped to make a college football playoff run. We've heard some thoughts on this courtesy of ESPN on what college football coaches think of the ACC contenders. Kenton Gibbs, in terms of biggest ACC football storylines, I am happy that the team that I cover, the season that Cam Ward has been having, does get covered plenty. We have not been short on Cam Ward coverage. I do feel like a little miffed that his team loses one game where he still put up big numbers and he goes from Heisman favorite to fourth. So I don't know. I mean, very, very fickle when it comes to the Heisman Trophy odds, but Cam Ward has gotten a lot of coverage. I think there are other stories in this league, both good and bad, that I'm surprised aren't being covered a little bit more. Is there anything that you look at as we're about 3/4 the way through the ACC football season that you just can't believe the media and the fans aren't talking more about?
I mean, I struggle to come up with one story because I think there's an overarching theme that the ACC just matters less that keeps coming out here. You just talked about it in terms of not only is it the teams, but also the individuals. Since when did Cam Ward become the fourth best player in America in terms of what they were talking about with Heisman? Since when did that happen? Yesterday, you and I talked about, or we talked on this show about, or 2 days ago rather, we talked about the situation going on in terms of is the ACC a one bid league? We talked about it on the squad as well. So
Right.
it's there are so many things. There are so many overarching stories where it's like there isn't a singular moment where you say, it's clear that this doesn't matter. But there are multiple times where you look up and say, oh, something fishy is afoot. Something ain't quite passing the smell test with the treatment of the ACC nationally.
Well, I'll give you a couple of players that I feel like if they were in the SEC, they'd be getting a lot more coverage. Isaac Brown, the freshman
Absolutely.
sensation at Louisville, is a big one for me. I mean, he's got 800 rushing yards, 7 rushing touchdowns. He's averaging 7.5 yards per carry, and that's with a heavy workload. And I've watched a lot of Louisville this season, and Isaac Brown he's been a revelation, right? I even thought, I know that Eli Holstein at Pitt has tailed off a bit, but those first 5 or so games, Kenton, when he was just slinging it, winning ACC Rookie of the Week every week, I didn't really feel like I heard anybody outside of ACC Network that was talking about Eli Holstein for what he was doing earlier on in the year. Now, I mentioned I'm pretty satisfied with the coverage that Cam Ward has been getting at Miami. At the same time, I feel like a guy like Xavier Restrepo deserves more coverage than he's gotten, right? And if the players I'm talking about, I feel like if they were in the SEC, they would get a lot more coverage. And I've also I've noticed something that's been going on, and I know people will see the colors that I'm wearing for those who are watching on YouTube, and they'll say it's easy for Dono to pile on this one, but I mean, I still can't. Doesn't it kind of feel like for the past month or so, national college football shows just kind of pretend that Florida State doesn't exist anymore? Like there's not really anything to talk about with Florida State, but I'm still dumbfounded by the idea that they went from, a preseason college football playoff pick, almost a consensus pick to win the conference again, 13-0 last year, to 1-9 this year. Some people, like Brian Smith of Locked On Seminoles, is wondering if they're even going to beat Charleston Southern this week. Like that's how far they've fallen. And I pull up this stat that I came across today on X. Florida State's 1-9. The only winless team in college football is Kent State, and Kent State has actually scored more points this year than Florida State has. They've outscored Florida State 143 to 133. There's like 14 individual players, not counting quarterbacks, but like players who've actually scored touchdowns. There's like 14 players in college football individually who have scored more touchdowns than Florida State's entire team this year, who scored just 14 touchdowns on the season. So in a negative way, Kenton, I feel like people probably should be talking about Florida State's fall from grace a little bit more.
This was one of the most unceremonious, most unprecipitous drops that we have ever seen. Donald, can you remember a time where a team was predicted to be better, or even in the same stratosphere, that fell off this far? For context, everybody, for context, this team was knocked out of bowl eligibility by week 7 or 8.
Yeah, week 7. Yeah.
Because they played week 0, everyone.
It was actually Miami who knocked them out of bowl eligibility in their 7th game of the year.
PU. But in all seriousness, this is unlike anything we've ever seen. So I get the idea of not wanting to kick a dead body. I understand, right?
Yeah.
Not wanting to say, we've picked apart how bad they were all year. I really do think it was like 2 weeks. Like after they beat Cal, and I want to say the next 2 games they lost, it was like, oh man, this team's falling pretty far. And that was it. Nobody really broke down and got into the numbers like you just did, Donald, in terms of I also want to say this. Somebody said that the most disappointing team, I can't remember who it was, I believe it was some national pundit, said the most disappointing team in the ACC was NC State. And I said, what?
I mean, how? I mean, and it
Don't get
goes
me
to what I'm
wrong.
saying, Kenton. People just forgot that Florida State existed.
Exactly. And don't get me wrong. I am not saying that NC State is playing good football. I'm not saying that they have not disappointed. They absolutely have disappointed. But it's like, which kid is more disappointing to you? The one that brought home a 2.0 GPA, or the one that burned down the school? Like what? Which kid did a worse thing? I struggle to wonder who did a better job. Like, come on, man. This is, so I absolutely agree with you, Dono. And it's not just you because you're a Miami guy. Here's the thing, right? A lot of people don't know this about me. I actually like a lot of ACC schools, a lot of them, before I knew anything about the ACC, before I came to play in the ACC. I knew a lot about a lot of these schools because I loved Michigan so much growing up. I couldn't like anybody else in the Big Ten. I had to hate everybody else in the Big Ten, and I had to hate USC, and I had to hate Notre Dame. And it was like, all right, well, the Pac-12 is out because they're buddies with USC. Everybody else is like not in the same realm. So I was like, all right, the SEC seems kind of weird. The ACC, those seem like some cool guys. Some of the Big East teams that ended up in ACC. They seem like some cool guys over there.
I loved. I mean, and listen, if the Big East still existed, I would want to do Locked On Big East, like for football, if they still existed. I would also want to do Locked On Big East. I love the Big East.
I'm not against that. That's not ridiculous. That's not ridiculous to say that. So, I really do look at Florida State and how far they've dropped and say this needs to be a bigger talk because, and Florida State fans shouldn't get upset when they hear that. But you shouldn't get upset because if you are a program that has a certain standard and you fall below it, you need to be talked about in this way. There's nothing worse in this world to be a man than to be a man with no expectations, because that means you're constantly pissing off. You're constantly doing the wrong thing. Okay? If Donald didn't come home for 3 days straight, he would have people to answer to because he's a man that he comes home. He does what he's supposed to do. Now, if Donald was a Rolling Stone, they'd just be like, hey, he's gone for 3 days. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just who he is. Florida State has been a team that has come home time and time again. They have dominated time and time again. They have had many more highs than they have lows of this level, time and time again. So when we are looking at a historic low, it needs to be talked about in a historical way.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, I want to pick your brain a little bit. And of course, Kenton Gibbs, who hosts Locked On Wolfpack, he played defensive line for NC State. So I've just, how they could go from what they were to what they are now. There's a couple more ACC storylines I'd like to get into, and I'd like to have a chat about which of the ACC championship contenders would be best equipped to make a run in the college football playoffs. You guys want to keep it locked. Not only are we not done yet, we're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. Guys, I love me some steak, and I'm so excited to announce to you guys the deals that you can get at omahasteaks.com. Omaha! Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. This year, skip the holiday hustle and bustle and save 50% off gourmet gifts site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, get a $30 reward card when you shop early and score an extra $30 off with our promo code COLLEGE. That's easy to remember, right? College. With 5 generations of experience, they consistently deliver the world's best steak experience. And gifting and the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages starting at $89.99. From legendary steaks to mouth-watering desserts and more, save 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE and a $30 reward card when you shop early. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. Minimum purchase may apply. Thank you for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, so Kent, did Florida State just run into a situation where, and yeah, like they've lost 9 of the 10 games that they've played this year, but not all of the losses are created equal, right? I mean, it came down to a final play against Georgia Tech. It was a close game and a loss against Boston College. They did manage to beat Cal. You notice week by week, though, the score lines get more and more lopsided in the favor of the other teams. They just lost 52-3 against Notre Dame. You know, they lost by Miami to 22 points, and people felt underwhelmed by Miami only beating them by 22 points. Has this just become a point where have most of the current players just kind of quit on the season? Is that what's happening, Kenton? Because I don't see any fight whatsoever.
Have they quit? Do you remember the old Roberto Duran and Sugar Ray Leonard fight?
No mas.
This is what has happened to this team. Florida State has been no mas on this season. They have officially told everybody, no mas. We are good. No me gusta. We are done. It is over. We don't want anything to do with being competitive this season. And it's to me, that's the most embarrassing part. I can deal with a team that does not have the aptitude for success, but they continue to fight. They literally do not have the ability to, they just don't have the horses in the stable. You got a bunch of 2-stars. You got a bunch of guys that are rejects from the other schools. You got the island of misfit toys. You got a ragtag bunch, and they're fighting for their lives. They just can't get it done. I can live with that. I could go to bed at night with that and say, well, hell, the results are still terrible. We're still losing. I ain't Fran Brown, so I'm going to take a long, hot shower and be sad about the loss, but I'm going to move on. But to have guys that honestly and truly, Donna, on paper, if you maximize this team's talent, right, even if we say, hey, DJ is legitimately not a 5-star, he should have been a 3-star out of high school. We'll pretend that, okay? What do you think this team's ceiling is had they played their best football this year? What do you think it would have been?
I don't, the ceiling, I mean,
yeah.
10, 11, 12 wins. I mean, they were supposed to be a really good team.
There you go. There you go. That's my biggest problem with this team. So if you're asking me, has this team quit? They have waved the white flag. Then they took that white flag off of the stanchion and turned it into a towel. And then they threw in that towel. They went and grabbed that towel and said they tapped out on the mat that they threw the towel on. And they got up and said, "No mas, we are good." They have quit in more spectacular ways than I have ever seen. And the person from War Chant who keeps posting the race is the prime example of just how bad this team has quit, because that race got lighter and lighter and then there was one guy that lost to the head coach. Tough times in Tallahassee. Tough times.
So from the tough times to the good, because all right, when we're talking about stories that just don't get talked about enough in the national media, SMU's season, do you feel like it gets enough coverage, Kenton? Because again, like they'll Mark Packer's going to talk about it on ACC Network. You and I talk about it on Locked On ACC. But you've got SMU that, and we both thought there were, and listen, they still have 3 games to play. But we thought that there would be growing pains, making the jump to Power 5. Have they been perfect? No, there's no perfect team in the ACC right now. Not Miami, not Clemson, not SMU, but they've gotten it done outside of a close loss to BYU, who's really good. They're undefeated. They're in the top 6, I think, of the college football playoff. And at SMU, to this point, they've made the most successful jump from Group of 5 to Power 4 that we've ever seen in college football. And also, that team's really fun to watch, Kenton. I mean, Kevin Jennings, their quarterback, the weapons that they have on the outside, Brashard Smith at running back, who's having a tremendous year. They're very easy on the eyes. I don't really feel like they've captured America's attention the way that they should.
Here's my biggest problem about them not capturing that attention in the way that they should. This team is not beating people. They're beating on people.
Yeah.
You understand? Now, for those of you who don't understand the difference, maybe it's a cultural thing. It's all right. I'll break it down for you, okay? To beat somebody means that you have more points than them at the end of the game. To beat on somebody, that means you're getting the wheels whooped off you. That means you are getting spanked and put to sleep. That means, that good whooping, that one where you didn't even need dinner to go to sleep. You just went to bed, tucked yourself in, and that was it. And that's what they're doing to people. This team is winning by an average of 20 points per game.
Wow. I didn't realize it was that high. Sheesh.
Their average score of an SMU game, ladies and gentlemen, the average score that we're looking at, they're the second best scoring offense in the league behind only Miami. They are the second best scoring defense in the league behind only Cal. The average scores to their game is just about 30. I'm sorry, not 30. I got that incorrect. 40 to 22. So they're winning by an amazing margin. And we're sitting up here saying, are they good enough? Can they do it? No other Power 4 team could do that. No other Power 4 team could win by an average of damn near 3 touchdowns. Have their only loss come to an undefeated fellow Power 4 team, and people look at them and say, are we sure they're for real? Are we? I don't believe them. They need more people. Well, does Texas need more people? Because I don't believe them.
Same. Yeah.
Texas looking like Penn State in the South. They might need more people. And yet, here we are sitting here saying, is SMU legit? Again, I can understand when people underrate Group of 5 teams to some extent, because I get it. Yeah. Generally, the strength of schedule is not as high, right? You have your exceptions, like Boise State having a higher strength of schedule in Colorado this year and all that type of stuff. You have your exceptions here and there. But by and large, a Group of 5 team will have a worse strength schedule than a Power 4. The Power 4, though, within the Power 4, this is what y'all got. This is what you wanted with all that expansion. One of the unintended consequences is that people will not play the best teams all the time anymore.
Yeah.
It's just how it works.
Well, and I think part of their problem is that it's that, not only does the ACC not get much respect, but they've got what's seen as an easy schedule even within the ACC. Now,
Yeah.
of course, they thought preseason that game that they had against Florida State that was
Yes.
going to be their bell cow opportunity. Didn't work out that way. Florida State's terrible. They do have a real quality win though over Louisville, so that I
And
think that
Duke.
should and
And
yeah, and
Duke.
Duke
2 wins over
and
ranked teams.
yeah, so I think those should probably carry more weight. And SMU is they're in the best position right now to play in
Yeah.
the ACC championship game. Let's talk about what, according to this ESPN article, I want to read some quotes from it when we come back. What coaches in college football are saying about the ACC contenders. So you want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. We've been having a blast all season long on FanDuel, placing wagers, getting all the live stats. Live betting is a game changer. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more right on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you so much for making this episode of Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, so Heather Dinich and Adam Rittenberg of ESPN, they've been talking to sources and coaches to find out who the best teams really are in every power conference. And I wanted to share with you some of the thoughts that are out there on the ACC, Kenton. Heather Dinich writes, in the ACC, Miami, SMU, and Clemson can still make it to the conference title game. Hopefully that Louisville fan writes back to her and say, don't forget about us, the one that called me out the other day.
You let them know.
Is a scenario. She left out Louisville the same way that I did the other day. She says, one coach told me that, quote, when Clemson is on, I think they're the most complete team. Miami and SMU would follow, he said, but unless they play each other, they're hard to sort out. If the coach had to pick, though, he says SMU might be the more complete team. That was from Heather Dinich. Here's from Adam Rittenberg. He says, Clemson's surprising shakiness on defense has most ACC coaches that I've talked to choosing between Miami and SMU. So it's interesting that there's a difference of opinions based on who they talk to. Quote, Miami's the most talented team we've played against, one coach said. Their offense is probably by far better than anyone else we've seen. He said that's all. They moved on to some other conferences after that. So basically, Heather Dinich's source is saying that Clemson's the most complete team when they're on, then maybe SMU over Miami. Rittenberg, it sounds like Miami is what he's hearing is the biggest threat, talking to ACC coaches. I think, Kent, like my consensus is there's not really a great consensus because I think, if everything's clicking for Clemson, they're a complete team, but they failed an important test against Georgia. And they obviously failed against a very good Louisville team at home. Miami has, passed a lot of tests, but with a lot of shakiness on defense. A lot of people still, like you just talked about, aren't really buying in on SMU yet. Maybe they don't have as much upside as Miami or Clemson, but they've been more consistent this year. So do you have kind of a read on which of those teams would give the ACC the best shot of making a college football playoff run?
Quick question. From what standpoint does SMU not have the same ceiling as those other two teams? Don't get me wrong. I think that Cam Moore and Kevin Jennings, two totally different. Hey, no disagreement for me there, right? I think Rashard Smith is a really good back. I don't think he's better than Fletcher and Martinez combined.
Right.
I think that the wide receiving core, I give Miami a slight edge because I really love SMU's receiving core. I really do think their pass catchers are special. Those special dudes. But defensively, right? In terms of how they gel, mesh, play as a unit, they are light years ahead of where Miami is.
Yeah.
And then I look at Clemson. With all due respect, in what world are we like seriously saying, hey, Clemson's right, they're the best. They've got the highest upside. They can do it with anybody. Because what have we seen from Clemson this year to indicate that? And I'm not joking when I say that. Quick question, Dono. Who's their best win on this year? Who's Clemson's best win?
I don't know. Florida State.
Florida. Okay, come on now.
Hold on. Let me pull up their schedule. I'll tell you.
In all seriousness, I think Virginia Tech, who they just had to come back against, is
Virginia
their best
Tech,
win of the season.
That was the best win. Yeah.
So your best win is a come from behind win against a Virginia Tech team that has massively underperformed this year, and you're still getting credit and love? Baby, it's because of that Paul on the side of your helmet. If this was Wake Forest, nobody would give a damn. Nobody would be sitting up here screaming, oh, this Wake Forest team is legit. They'd be saying they got embarrassed and dressed down by Georgia, and they lost to the only other good team they played in Louisville. I thought that I was wrong, and I got on here and I ate crow. That crow turned out to be the finest of chicken, not just
spit it out then,
with the Colonel's 12 special seasons and spices. It was that chicken that grandma made, the one to stick to your ribs a little bit. It was that one. It was that chicken. Because once again, when faced with real competition, when faced with actual good teams, Clemson just showed us who they were. Is App State a really good team this year? No. NC State? No. Stanford? No. Florida State? No. Wake Forest? No. Virginia? No. Virginia Tech? No. So I'm sorry to tell you. I'm so sorry to tell you this, Clemson friends. This idea that when they're clicking, they're this great team. They're front runners that beat up on lesser teams. Good for them. It's just we're not in the Big Ten, so unfortunately, it's not enough. Fortunately for Clemson, they built up the brand equity to be given that benefit of the doubt regardless. That's the only thing. Because if there were any other team in the ACC, nobody would take this seriously and be like, hey, that's a contender. That's a contender there. If it was Cal with this same schedule doing this, people would be like, we'll figure it out when they get to a real team again, who they are. But for whatever reason, we give Dabo and them the benefit of the doubt. Well, not for whatever reason, because historically Clemson has done what they've done. They get the benefit of the doubt, and I get that. Unfortunately, I can't remember what character it was, but to quote one of my favorite sayings from The Wire, that's the thing about the old days. Well, they the old days.
I love The Wire. Got to watch that. I don't remember who that quote was either. Who do you think had the best quotes? Omar?
Oh, Omar's quotes were, boy, you really can't.
Come at the king, hard. You best not miss.
Listen, and one more thing. Tell them the price of the brick went up. Oh, my God. Yes. What? Come on, man. Come on. You can't beat Omar. You can't beat it. Barksdale has some pretty good ones, but you can't beat Omar.
Yeah. All right. Well, we appreciate everyone for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. Enjoy all the games this weekend. Hit that thumbs up button. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On ACC on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. He is Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack. I am Alex Dono from Locked On Canes. And we'll talk to you next time on another episode of Locked On ACC, part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.